Most mummies are made by the living after a person has died, but in the mountains of Yamagata, Japan, a group of radical monks practiced a ritual so extreme they began the mummification process while they were still breathing. This is the story of the Sokushinbutsu, monks of the Shingon school of Buddhism who believed that by reaching the ultimate state of asceticism, they could become living Buddhas, preserving their physical forms to aid humanity from beyond the veil of death. The practice was pioneered by the legendary monk Kukai, also known as Kobo Daishi, who was said to have entered a state of eternal meditation within a cave on Mount Koya, where his followers believe he remains alive to this day. Inspired by this divine endurance, hundreds of monks over the centuries attempted the grueling 3,000-day ordeal of self-mummification, a process that demanded the systematic destruction of the body's fat, moisture, and muscle, while the mind remained locked in a state of unwavering spiritual focus. This was not a suicide, in their eyes, but a slow-motion transformation, a biological bridge between the mortal realm and the infinite, constructed from the very flesh of the practitioner. The first phase of the ritual lasted 1,000 days and was designed to strip the body of every ounce of fat, which is the primary cause of post-mortem decomposition. The monk would adopt a diet known as mokujiki, or tree eating, consuming nothing but pine needles, resin, seeds, and nuts gathered from the surrounding forests. As the body began to starve, it would enter a state of ketosis, consuming its own tissues to survive, while the monk engaged in intense physical labor and ice-cold meditation under waterfalls to further harden the spirit. By the end of this first 1,000-day cycle, the practitioner was little more than a walking skeleton, his skin clinging to his bones like parchment, but the most horrific stage was yet to come. In the second 1,000-day phase, the monk began drinking a toxic tea made from the sap of the urushi tree, the same sap used to create traditional Japanese lacquer, which contains a potent poison called urushiol. The urushi tea served a dual macabre purpose. It induced violent vomiting and sweating, further dehydrating the body until almost no fluid remained, and it acted as a powerful internal preservative. The poison saturated the monk's tissues, making his flesh toxic to the maggots and bacteria that would normally consume a corpse, essentially lacquering the internal organs from the inside out while the heart was still beating. Every sip of the bitter, toxic brew was a step toward becoming a permanent relic, a biological masterpiece that would resist the natural laws of decay. By the time the monk entered the final phase of the ritual, he was a living mummy, his body chemistry so altered by poison and starvation that he was no longer a biological organism in the traditional sense, but a vessel of chemical and spiritual endurance. For the final 1,000 days, the monk would be lowered into a stone tomb barely large enough for him to sit in the lotus position. He was buried alive, with only a thin bamboo tube providing a straw-sized umbilical cord of air to the surface. In total darkness and silence, he would meditate, ringing a small bell once a day to let his followers above know that he was still alive. Day after day, the bell would chime, until eventually the sound would stop. When the silence became permanent, the air tube was removed and the tomb was sealed with charcoal for another 1,000 days. When the followers finally opened the stone chamber, they were looking for a miracle. If the body had rotted, the monk had failed and was buried with honors. But if the body was dry, intact, and incorrupt, he was declared a Sokushinbutsu, a living Buddha who had conquered death through sheer force of will. Today, only about 22 of these living Buddhas remain in the temples of northern Japan, the most famous being Shinyokai Shonin, who completed his ritual in 1783 at the age of 96. These figures are not viewed as macabre curiosities by the locals, but as sacred guardians who continue to meditate for the salvation of the world. The practice was officially banned by the Japanese government in 1877, classified as a form of assisted suicide, but the silent leather-clad figures in the mountain temples serve as a chilling testament to a time when faith was measured in the slow, deliberate destruction of the self. They sit in eternal silence, their parchment-like skin a map of an agonizing journey toward enlightenment, a reminder that for some, the greatest victory over life is the refusal to let the body die even after the breath has long since departed.